hello to Mara Davies.
Who's that? Mara Davies?
Uh-huh, she's new for the club, just so you'll know.
Okay. Well, good. We'll talk to her after Mr. Mariana gets with through his little talk. John, you go ahead, please.
All right. Fine art photography, the important element of composition is tonight's presentation. And I am really pleased to present it to everyone. I just think this is so neat. These are sculptures. I don't even remember where that is, but it's so appropriate today with a cell phone in the hand of Benjamin Franklin or whomever else that is. I think that is just perfect saying of what is the world today. Fine art print. A fine art photograph involves this: special and skillful uses of composition techniques, which I will explain, the observation and understanding of light, of dark areas, the highlight areas, what aspect of the light is so important to a fine art print. I'll talk about that. Understanding the lines, forms, the visual relationships, how that castle stands out in relation to being framed by the trees around it and so on. So I will talk about those aspects, the composition, understanding light, lines, forms, visual relationships. Most important thing is you do not take pictures, you make pictures. And keep that in mind. Just taking a shot with your, usually with a cell phone or with a camera, that's just taking a picture. Now you want to make it. And when we did film, we would load the film in camera, expose, and 1 hour have 1 hour processing of the film. And we would get prints and process films. And then in that 1 hour processing, there would be white balance, exposure, highlights adjusted, the sharpness, saturation, all those kinds of things would happen in that software of the 1 hour processor. Today, digital, you expose, and you could have prints or digital files, but that's not the important part of today. Today's digital is to have software, which I use Photoshop, to do all of those special aspects of enhancing an image, and you'll see why. So what are you communicating? That's the most important thing. What are you communicating? That you were there, the place looked like this, weather was like this, I was with these people, here's my cute little dog. No, you care about those, but does a viewer? A viewer is not important to those kinds of interests in those kinds of aspects. So let me point out what is important. The instant visual impact. When an image is first seen, that instant impact is so important. And the aspects of that image that are so important, you see the contrast levels, the highlights, the shadows, tonalities, saturation. You want to elicit an emotional response to the image. So an instant impact and elicit an emotion. And you do that by telling a story. So the first three things: instant impact, elicit an emotion, and tell a story. Also, on any fine art print, any image that you're working with, that you're presenting or having printed, the highlights should not be blown out. They should have texture. So think about that when you're photographing and exposing, and maybe you need to do multiple exposures. So you get detail in the shadow and detail in the highlights, texture in the highlights. The important shadow areas have detail. Notice down in the lower right area, I have detail in every portion of this image and in the sky. And if you notice also that the bottom portion is a little darker, top portion is a little darker, highlight is the center of the image. So instant impact, tell a story, and how the clouds point to these rock structures, and elicit an emotion related to the color. The highlights and the shadows must emphasize the key elements so that this is out in Yosemite, and the colors of the trees bring you around from the right here on into the image, but you're coming in from the left, you visualize, and it brings it back into the image. So how does your eye enter an image? In our world, we read left to right. So you come into an image left to right. How do you keep an eye or the viewer in the image? And I call that containment. And where does the eye rest in the image? And it's going to rest on the brightest area. How does your eye repeat the image? What are the various lines within an image and that circle around for the viewer to keep coming around in the image when they come in from the left? So composition techniques. Photograph this in Canyon de Chelly. Now watch, this is how I was standing photographing it, but how I present it is to left to right, flip it horizontally. You see how you read that differently? This way, you see the buildings, but the tree and the right-hand side lets you fall off the right-hand side of the image. This way, you come in from the left and you now concentrate on the ruins, the bright ruins and the darker ruins. And I managed and worked on the image also, but at the time of photographing it, to position myself so that the darker ruins were against a lighter area of the background, because that creates three-dimensionality. If you have clouds or no clouds, if you have a clear sky, the difference of having clouds in the sky or adding them creates three dimension and creates an instant impact of that ruin standing out against a brighter area in the clouds. Should it be horizontal or vertical? It depends. I'll talk about that. But you want to also think about three-dimensional techniques, how there's a foreground, a middle ground, and the background, and how the viewer's eye flows through the image. And when I photographed this is in Venice, I was careful to keep the top of that church within the image so that you would feel the three-dimensionality of the canal going backwards and the building in the back. And panoramas, very important images, aspects. Now we read left to right. So we really come in from the left of an image. And it's important to accommodate the eye moving across the image to keep it from going off the right-hand side. For example, if I flip this image this way, your eye comes in, sees the main part, and then you tend to go off the right-hand side of the image. This is the way I shot it, and this is the way I present it. And you notice the clouds, and they were really there. I did not put those in, are all pointing to the peak mountain sticking up there. And this tree on the left, as you come in from the left, it keeps you from going back off the left-hand side. It's a containment to keep the eye in the image. So you come in and you look right up at that upper portion. Left to right, as I said, showed in the beginning, the ruins, and then flipping it this way, now you come in and you look right at the ruins. Here, you tend to go up to this upper right-hand area and then off the right-hand side of the image because the flow of the image and the scene is off to the right. Presenting it this way, everything is coming down and pointing at that ruin, and you look at that ruin right away. That's where your eye goes instantly. And that on the right-hand side is the containment to push the eye back in. And it's a lot of detail and structure compared to the left side of the image, which has lines and things, but it's smoother in the scene. Shot this up in the Smoky Mountains on my workshop that I teach up there. And I'll be teaching in the workshop again this April. If anyone's interested, please send me an email. We stay in a beautiful cabin. We all stay in the same cabin cabin. It has 9 bedrooms, each bedroom, double bed, private bath, and a jacuzzi. It's very special, has uh, a kitchen area, all kinds of things. But in any case, this is up in the Smoky Mountains. And you read this from left to right. Well, if you do that, then the water takes you out the right-hand side. Having it read this way, the water actually brings you into the image. And the animal standing on the right becomes a containment. And all the structure on the right-hand side of all the trees and everything that's there, much more interesting than what was on the left side over here. So the eye comes in from the left and really appreciates the image much better. As you see this image and you come in from it, again, you tend to go off the right-hand side. Flipping it horizontally, you come in, look right into the face of the bird, compared to here, where you see the back of the bird, you follow that through and then off the right-hand side of the image. Come in from the left, look right into the face of the bird. And the larger structure of everything on the right becomes the containment to push you back into that. And brightening the head of the bird just a little bit creates an impact of looking at the face of the bird. This one demonstrates it even more so. Coming in from the left, you actually flow out that piece of the tree, and the bird is actually looking out that way, so you follow it out. Flipping it, now the tree brings you right up to the bird, and you look right into the face of the bird. So important, left to right. Scenics. You look right in there, you see the animal, and then you look to see what else is over there on the right. And you ignore, in a way, you ignore those beautiful stone structures. Presenting it left to right, now you come in and you see the animal sitting there, and I've highlighted the animal much more in relation to the other highlight on the stone, on the rocks, so that the image works well. But you come in and you see that, and that's where your eye stays. The rocks on the right-hand side are darker to the far right, and so that's the containment. And so when you come in and you come over to the rocks, you come up and you look back down and see the animal sitting there. Leading lines. Leading lines are so important of how whatever it is that you're in your image, that'll push the viewer to where you want them to look. So the road coming in, left, right, and then up to the church. And I've darkened the foreground just a little bit, and the upper part of the sky darker, so that it pushes you down into the image and lightened and intensified the colors leading up to the church. And the church is a little brighter than the rest. So that's your center of focus. But the leading lines are what are so important to get you to there. Leading lines pushes you right where the main subject. For all this time, your thyroid eye disease could, especially in this image, you see the leading lines. They just come in and you follow and you stay right into the center of the image because of those leading lines. So very important to look at how the image is constructed with leading lines. The other very important aspect of composition is rule of thirds, divided evenly left to right and up and top to bottom. And those cross points are the critical points of where a viewer will look. So, for example, in this image, the cross point is on the light tower, and down here in the left side, this vertical is where the main part of the house. So let's go back to my Yosemite image. We look at dark against light, for one thing. Dark against light has it stand out all the time. The rule of thirds, that main important area is right up near that power point. And the horizon is along that lower portion of the grid so that that's where the best balance is to have the horizon. Oh, and I highlighted the trees against the darker trees, which brought out more three-dimensionality. Go from there. Rule of thirds. Rule of thirds on a shot like this. Yes, have the main subject, when there isn't anything else in the image, at one of the power points so that it emphasizes it even more. And it's horizontal, this vertical line filling where the whole portion of the butterfly is located. This one emphasizes it tremendously. Here's the rule of thirds. PowerPoint for the flower, right in the center of the flower. PowerPoint for the hummingbird coming up. So very important. And that structure, and of course I have the flow of the portion of the flower that brings you in from the left also, up along and then back to the left so that you don't go off the right-hand side of the image. But the PowerPoints are so important on this image. All images, really, keep that in mind. PowerPoint on an image like this. The head and the neck are at that upper area of the PowerPoint. And the body flows down through on a diagonal to the other PowerPoint down in the lower right-hand portion of the image. And you note that the head and neck are placed in the upper part. So here's the horizontal line of the upper portion, and that contains the most important part of the image. And the PowerPoint is almost right on the head, but I wanted it down just a little bit to capture the whole rest of the image. A flower floating in water, and the rule of thirds. That PowerPoint line coming across, so that's where the flower is placed. Across PowerPoint down here, where the bud under the water, so that the flow works related to the three-dimensionality and the PowerPoint. Shading and contrast are so important. This image, you see it as I have finished it, but there's a darkening of the foreground, darkening of the sky, and I highlighted the center and highlighted mostly around where the building is, but also the clouds just a little bit. Also, so important, the clouds are not pure white. There's texture in those clouds. Don't want them to be pure white. So dark at the top, dark at the bottom, highlight in the center, pushes the viewer right into the image. And the most important highlight is where the structure is and the tree. And so I've highlighted that even more. This is a very flat image, but I had every bit of detail that I wanted. So now it's just a matter of creating the contrast to it to have it be an impact. So darkening everything in the background more so than the flower, and then keeping the detail in the flower. And now that is where the eye goes first. It's the brightest. If you come back to the original, everything is at almost the same amount of highlight. Now it's three-dimensional, and the flower really stands out so much more. Shot this in the aquarium down in Atlanta. And as I saw it, captured it, I often leave a little more space around what I'm capturing so that I can crop it, do things with it later. So the little bit of something hanging down here in the bottom and the fact that it's pointing to the right isn't as important as cropping it in, cropping down from the top to emphasize the main subject. I used a vignette to have the corners darkened to bring the eye in even more and highlighted down through the center of it. Now it's tending to take you off to the right. So flipping it horizontally, And the viewer now comes in from the left and looks down through the whole structure. Very important, left or right, how you're presenting the image to the final viewer. And in this image, just creating more contrast makes it three-dimensional. This image, so many of those bright areas are distracting. This is up in Old Car City, and I wanted to capture the essence of that hood and the emblem on the top. So I needed to do some shading and contrast. So removed all those highlights, and now see how you come down into the center of the image. And the center of the image is where I enhanced the colors and brought more texture out by using contrast and highlighted. So that now when you first see the image, you're brought right into the center of it. And that structure at the top, I actually put a brighter area around it, because here, although it's bright against dark, having that opened up more and bringing the background out more allows it to be more three-dimensional. So shading, contrast extremes. Shot this on a workshop with that Darcy Pino holds periodically in Costa Rica. And the two frogs looking at each other, oh, that's perfect. And they were that way. I didn't create it. They were actually doing that. So contrast extremes. So back to that one, the highlights on the frogs, and I increased the contrast so that the background was pure black almost, but I allowed to have some detail. I didn't want it to be just something that was those frogs against the black, because it wouldn't be as realistic as having some of the detail in the background. And this image crosses, I could have added a sky there, but having those against the highlight allows them to stand out much more three-dimensional. And the dark figure walking in, and actually I placed this figure in there in the shadow and placed it so that her head would be against the brighter area in the background. So that creates three dimensions, three-dimensionality. Those portions of the image are too bright against the darker background, but not pure black, especially the petals sitting on the water and being so bright against the darker area background. Bird against the dark background, but not pure black. And the bottom portion is a little darker than the upper portion. And actually, as on this presentation, I see that I've lost detail in the highlights on the back of the bird, but I do have them in there. I would not have pure white on the image. Reflections, highlights, a darker area at the bottom. Contrast, three-dimensionality, emphasizing the highlights and keeping detail in those highlight areas, and having a little bit of texture and aspects in the background create three-dimensionality. Now we'll replace clouds. Think, come on, John, you're standing there. It's sort of a neat scene. Yes, well, watch the three-dimensionality when all that I've done is to add clouds to the sky. So here to there. So it's something for the viewer to see and creates three dimensions, that there's more than just a plain sky. Very important. On this one, shot this up near Cartersville, and it was going in that direction. Of course, coming in from the left, you tend to follow this out the right-hand side. So just flip it horizontally. So now you're looking right into the face of the bird, and the wing is keeping you from going straight off the right-hand side. Well, it's striking against the white, lighter sky, but if I put in a wonderful cloud formation, then it becomes so much more three-dimensional. The contrast, three-dimensionality. Same day, shooting this, and Mama bringing food to the baby in the sky, and I darkened the upper portion of the sky, highlight in the center, and I thought, no, I'll add a sky. And it is so easy now with adding skies in Photoshop. So I'll add clouds, and it's an evening scene so that I get wonderful color and bring out a whole aspect of three-dimensionality and a feeling of evening so that it's more than just Mama bringing to the baby. It's a whole feeling of the time of day. This is shot in the Southwest, and watch fill the sky in. How much more three-dimensional. This is wonderful foreground, and those rocks stand out against that sky, but putting in clouds, and when I put the clouds in, I purposely put the white portions of the clouds against where the dark portions of those rocks standing up. And the same with these rocks on the lower left here, or on the left side, be dark against light. And darken the foreground just a little bit. And watch from here to there. And you see I've darkened the foreground and over here to the right, which pushes you into the center of the image. From there to there. But how much more those clouds create three-dimensionality. Southwest, I was just taken with the structure of those rocks. So the format, I've initially put a plain sky in, not to compete in any way with the rocks, and did a vignette so that you would come in, and I highlighted the main portion of the rock standing out. Then I thought about doing a sky replacement even more and put clouds in. And I also watched the foreground, the detail in the foreground, which I emphasized even more. So here's from there to this sky to the final, and the detail in the foreground so that your eye comes to the foreground, even with all that beautiful sky there. Because here the rock stands out. Well, the rock stands out now very nicely, and I've placed white, lighter sky where the rocks can stand out against lighter sky rather than have just blue there. This is in Greece, and was such a beautiful structure of all these buildings. So, but nothing happening in the sky. Well, that's okay. And if I darken the foreground just a little bit, push the eye into the buildings, add the sky so that it creates the three dimension. Watch how much more three-dimensional by having those clouds. And I placed the clouds so that the top of the building in the upper right is dark against light. And whatever is sticking up here, a flag or whatever it is, dark against the light clouds. And I've darkened the foreground just a little bit. So if we go back from here to here, and you see how I've darkened the foreground just a little bit, push the eye up into the image. And with those clouds put in there, I've darkened the upper portion of this cloud of the sky to push you down into the main portion of the image, which is the brightest area. So here actually looks very flat now to there, three-dimensional. And the buildings, I've highlighted them just a little bit, but did not blow out any of the detail. So they're bright, but have texture in them. Dark against light in the sky, good detail to darkness in the foreground to push you into the main portion of the item, of the image. This is in Scotland, and it's a unique ruin, castle. It was on a day of plain sky, so okay, good. So I also then captured a bagpiper, but that would be interesting. Somehow I can tell a story with it. Put in clouds that will point to the ruins and emphasize the foreground with some color and the building. So I've saturated and opened up some detail in the building and placed the bagpiper so that I tell a story, create initial impact and tell a story, elicit an emotion. Those three things: impact, tell a story, elicit emotion. Out west, sky was very nice, but if I work on it, put those clouds that are leading lines pointing down into the structure, how much more three-dimensionality. Darken the foreground just a little bit. Darken the foreground just a little bit. Actually lighten this foreground a little bit to bring you into the image from the foreground and darken the upper portion. This one that I showed before. I used the neural filter feature in Photoshop and said winter, and it created this from this. What a neat thing. And it kept the sky with some color in it, which I thought was really interesting. So just clicking on winter in neural filters, and that's what I came out of this image. So let's talk about format presentation. How do you present it? You think about containments that I've been talking about, roundness, all kinds of aspects, format. Photographed this in a church and I mean in a public building. And so I wanted to use it as an example of many of the features that I look for in structures, architectural structures. So first of all, are containments. The structures here keep you from going off the left and right-hand side. The leading lines on the floor. So I could have cropped this so that I was getting only the balcony, but that would not have given me the leading lines. Then I have a balance of tones, upper left, upper right, lower left, the balance a little darker to the rest of the image. And a little darkening around the left side of the pillars to give them more three-dimensional roundness. And the containment, if I had cropped this down at the top so that I was just the top of that light structure, I wouldn't have that upper arch to push the eye down into the image. And the railing here creates a three-dimension aspect of foreground and middle ground much more than just coming over to it and photographing the structure. So giving all the aspects, I photographed this in the Smoky Mountains. And when I looked at it on the back of my camera, I realized that's way too tight at the bottom. I've captured the whole waterfall. I have the trees coming in dark against the light. I knew I would convert it to a black and white. And the upper left dark pushing you down into the waterfall, but it's too tight at the bottom. No place to stand, no place to feel three-dimensionality. So in that area, I had another shot that had the foreground. Because I was standing there and looked at the back of my camera, I said, no, I need to include that to give the feeling of the full aspect of the waterfall. See how tight that looks? And it's not as comfortable looking as when I give you the full image. This was shot out West Canyon de Chelly, and it's a panorama. It's a multi-shot panorama. And the ruins, you had seen those before, but let me take it apart rather than seeing this whole horizontal image. Here's a portion of it, that center portion. Oh, very interesting with the building, the ruins, the brighter area ruins, beautiful lighting coming down onto these trees. So yes, that stands well on its own. And if I take a portion of it where you have the little hut and a person standing there, that creates a good flow of lines coming down uh, from the upper left to the ruins. But if I look at that upper portion overall and think if I crop down from that to concentrate more on the ruins, now I'm forcing you instantly to see the structures, but it feels awkward over here on the right. So doing the panorama and including those trees and the whole flow of the mountain gives the final image. Capture the entire scene. So vital. Yosemite. And I talk about giving the viewer a place to stand. So if you give the viewer a place to be in the image with you, then they see the image much more three-dimensional than if they are just looking at it. So give them a place to stand. And on this image, which is one of my best images of Yosemite, I think, I was standing there. I purposely included the snow on the rocks in the lower left to provide a place to stand there. Watch what it seems and how it feels to you without that there. Certainly a good scenic, but you are looking at it now. You aren't part of it. By having that place to stand, you become part of the image. You're there. You're feeling that you're actually standing there looking at the scene. So much more impressive that way. Now, do you do vertical or horizontal? Shot this in Samantha. No, I don't remember. Savannah. Yeah, it's in Savannah. And the two little gals and all those trees framing them. And so as a vertical, it works really well. See, you can't come in otherwise and come down. Now they stand out certainly because of the bright areas of the dress, which are not blown out and placed under the arch of each of the limbs. So it works as a vertical and it works as a horizontal, giving much more feeling to the entire scene. It just depends on which way you want to present the image. So think about that when you're photographing and photograph both. With all the trees surrounding and framing and the foreground darkened a little bit and the brighter area in the center. Good vertical, very interesting as a horizontal. Out west and the shiprock standing out against the moon and the flow of your eye coming down to it. So it works as a strong vertical, works as a very good horizontal. Here's the structure, the stone structures to the left, and the foreground darkened a bit, bring you into shiprock standing in the background. Darken the sky a bit to bring you down into the image. So vertical works, horizontal works. Same with architecture. On this image, it was so important to get down a little bit so that I wasn't capturing all the detail on the top of the pews. And I wanted to be sure to capture the column on the left and on the right, which would push you into the image. So on this full presentation, you get the paintings on the walls, but also to crop in and just do the structure itself is interesting. So I just took that image, cropped off the left and the right, and now I have a different presentation. Now it's much more architectural, and the center of interest being here in the altar standing out against the background, darker background. I tend to like the larger one where I see all the detail of the paintings and things. And it's just a matter of where you're presenting it and what the purpose is. So very strong verticals. What's important to the image on the left is I kept the peak in the image so that it wouldn't just be cropped off at the top. And that archway pushes you down to the main portion of the image. And on the right, that curve at the top. So if I had cropped it down too much, I would lose that upper portion. That's very important to be darker up there and to push your eye down also, including those structures on the left and right to keep you from going off left or right. And they push you into the centerpiece of the image. I do it again. Is it vertical or horizontal? Well, such beautiful structure everywhere, but it was a very bright area here. So I had captured this monk on a different shot at the same location, placed the monk in there, and that then creates the view to come over and see that and tell a story. And the structure of the large pillars and things over here on the left pushes you in even more. And all the highlights, the main highlights, I've darkened the foreground, darkened some of the upper portion. So the main highlights are in the arches, but the brightest area is here where the fellow is standing. Verticals, simplicity, the hummingbird coming right up into the flower. Obviously, I had taken many shots and captured it just as it got into the flower. And the leaves pushing your eye back down into the image, very important. Portraiture, highlight of the face, dark around there, detail in the highlights, and the structure such that holding the arms and not the hands folded together, but each hand showing to give a better presentation of the face and the whole image itself. So, how about three-dimensional techniques? I've been talking about them throughout, but containment lines, talked about leading lines, dynamic lines, triangles, I'll talk about those a little bit now, and rigid lines, lines that keep the viewer from going off anywhere. So this rigid line of this log laying down keeps you from coming down the left and going out, and the rigid line of the grasses. This is Maxfield Parrish, and I studied a lot of his paintings, and they're so striking because they emphasize so many things related to all presentation of special artwork. Here's the rule of thirds, the major point here in this lower left. The diagonals, which create are much more interesting than if they were flat structures, level structures. Triangles. You'd be surprised how much it is part of an image that portions of the image are pulled together within a triangle. So Ansel Adams, one of Ansel's famous images, dark against light, three-dimensional, light against dark, and alternating dark light portions of the image creates three-dimensionality. Shot this up in Massachusetts. Leading lines, very important. So lead you in and brings you around to that ship. Also, I could have eliminated that structure standing up, but doing that, it actually, as you come around, you tend to go off the right-hand side. So it's a containment that keeps you from doing that. So that's very important to have that containment structure to bring the eye back to the main portion of the image. So coming around from the left, and then that pier pushes you back to the ship. Again, architecture, the main area of the image is the door and the structure there. So I want everything pointing there. So all of the pews point in that direction, all the leading lines from the architecture coming down, and all of the arches in the ceiling, and I did not crop off any of that upper portion of that ceiling so that I could keep that to bring the eye down in. And the containments of the structures on each side, especially with the sculptures on them. Three-dimensionality technique. The lady is standing very silhouette against the light background. And all the lines have moved around so that all the lines would be pointing to that portion of the image. And that structure on the left is a containment to keep the eye from going off the left side and to create a balance for her standing there. And that is balanced with the structure on the right-hand side. I could have cropped this down through the center here and made her just part of it, but this creates a three-dimensionality of the image with the two structures. The leading lines following around, comes around from the body and down through the reflection and then back up again. So the curves keep the eyes moving all around the center of the image. And the brighter areas are the upper portion with texture in all those areas and a good reflection and detail in those shadow areas. But more importantly, how the eye flows around the image. A light against dark. Bottom portion, this is a panorama also. In the bottom portion, bright portion of the day, the highlights down through that center and the beauty of it. So that, and then having the darker trees against the lighter portions of the mountain behind it creates three dimensions. And I had to wait for a while to the light hit those portions of the mountains in the background so that the dark was standing out against the light. And then the dark against the light in the sky. And I just dodged a little bit of the clouds up here so that the mountain stands out more three-dimensional. So you have from there to there, dark to light, and dark to light, three-dimensionality. This is the Great Sand Dunes in Colorado. And there have dark against light. Actually, the clouds were there, and I waited for the clouds to be moving so that it wasn't just blue sky behind the mountain. And dark against light, dark against light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. And I did that by just dodging and burning in the image to create the three-dimensionality of the overall image from there. Spatial relationships are so important. Yeah, foreground, middle ground, background. Photograph this fellow walking along the street in Taos thought I would use him at some point. I just wanted the different positions. Photographed a horse wandering around in a pen and the saddles, and I took a portion of that saddle and the stirrup them together and put him in this image to create a story. I thought, oh, okay. And there are footsteps going up through there. They were already there. So I placed him there as a silhouette, dark against light, 3-dimension. But it'll be more interesting if he had his horse with him. So I had the horse that I photographed. Putting it in as a light is not good. So I would create the shadow out of that and him. Now that creates a much more interesting image telling a story, final composition, panoramas, multi-shot panorama, Yosemite. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they should be overlapped by at least a third. I don't even measure them much. I just overlap them based on thinking them through as I'm seeing them on the back of my camera. And then it's easy to put them together in Photoshop and create a full flowing panorama. But most importantly was this structure, this photo, last photo, were the trees with a light behind them so that they would be a containment on the right side to bring you back into the image. And the clouds, which were there, are pointing down to the center of the image. And so as you can see from the images on the bottom, I did a little darkening at the bottom of the image and a little at the top. Up in the Smoky Mountains in Cades Cove, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and overlap just manually, put them all together, and you have a striking image. And you notice that the trees on the left, once you come in from the left and see the structure, those on the right bring you back in and frame the barn. Those on the left keep you from going off the left. I thought it'd be neat to tell a story. So put a bear in there. And that really makes a difference. Look at the difference. It's a beautiful image the way it is, but now I'm telling a story. So instant instant view and then tell a story. So you don't take pictures, you make them. Just wanted to final with some of these. This was up in the Smoky Mountains, and often you're photographing water, and when you look at the final image, it's bluish. Just turn the blue to white and have the water look realistic and white. It doesn't read as well as if I flip it horizontally. Well, first of all, open up the shadow areas. See down here in the lower left and in the upper part so that I get good detail and darken the upper portion just a little bit. Now, flip it horizontally and just darken that center piece so that the eye stays in the center of the image. Shiprock, too much foreground, but I can take care of that easily and do something about the sky. So simple enhancements, just darkening that sky, cropping up from the bottom and darkening the bottom creates 3-dimensionality. You don't have to do as many as detailed techniques as I demonstrated throughout the presentation. These are just very simple techniques. From there to there. Up in the Smoky Mountains, and I wanted to tell a story. So in this case, it's easy in the sense of brightening and lightening the water to white, but see these highlights in the background? I wanted to remove those, and I wanted to create a story. So I removed those highlights, and I placed the two animals in there. And I thought about just the first animal, but I thought it would really be neat if they had another one filling in that area on the left. So I fill in on the right and then fill in the left also. A little more sophisticated. This is 4 separate images: wings, the lady standing, the sky, even more so, creating an interest, telling a story. This is a friend of mine, and she does superb work. I met her when I was teaching in Chicago at a cathedral, and she came and she said, "I don't know how to do any of this." And boy, has she learned since then. Here's a composite that she's created. Another one. Artistic reality is everywhere. This is a famous painting. I don't remember who the painter is. And I did not do anything with this. I just simply copied it. That McDonald's emblem was put in there to play with the idea that you have a famous painting adjusted. This is from the Photographic Society of America. You can see the images that were used at the bottom to create the final image at the top. Truly artistic image. So why was Mona Lisa smiling? She was watching him work. Damn fine stuff. Thank you.
Well,
I
John,
teach, well, let me just finish. I teach many people how to edit and enhance their images on Zoom. So I offer one-on-one tutoring on Zoom at $45 an hour. And if you're interested, please send me an email. You share your screen and you work on an image on your computer on Photoshop, and I walk you through the editing of it, and or I get the image also and I share my screen and show you how I do the images. So if you're interested, please send me an email or call me, and we can set up a 1-hour session, whatever it's convenient for you during the day at any time. So if you have any questions or anything, sir, what do you think?
I think the presentation was fantastic. I learned a lot.
Well,
But
thank you.
you're obviously an expert on Photoshop and all that, but how many hours do you spend on an average on one print?
Usually not very much. Only maybe 4 or 5 minutes to do the basic kinds of things. But if I'm then creating a composite, it could be 25 minutes to a half hour.
Wow. Okay. Put the rest of us in our place, I think, if you can do it that fast.
Well,
Anybody got any questions?
did it work all right tonight? Was the presentation?
I think it worked very well. Very
Yeah,
well.
this was great. Thank you, John.
Oh, thank you, Laura.
Anybody else got any more questions? You must have done it well, John, because explained everything, and well, we appreciate it again. We appreciate it a lot. We're going to go on and do some club business. So I know you're not interested in what we're going to be doing on all that, but thank you for your time.
Okay, thank